To the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And welcome to, a remote session. We finally got some cameras set up and a microphone, so we get Maul from his own home. And then you got Pops last week, just audio only, because Pops' internet is absolute trash. So I hope he listens to this.
Just to if the audio is a little weak, I've got a mic coming. We're working on it, so just bear with us while we sort out our equipment problems. But hopefully this works out, and hopefully you guys enjoy the episode here.
Yeah, I'll make it so we can at least get one in a week without just me up here monologuing, talking, my own opinions. I get some, some other food for thought that helps balance out everything.
Sure.
But, before we get started, past and present, I told Maul to study. And so we're going to find out. So you want past or you want present first?
Let's just do present to get that one out of the way.
Okay. Well, if you watched last night's game, I thought he had a good night running the football. For Tampa Bay, Rachaad White. Where did he go to school?
So that's so funny you brought that up, because watching the game, I looked it up because I was going to give you that hint, because he was a guy who, going into the season, I think we said at the beginning, we're like, he's not the guy, like he might be a gap filler, but there was a couple teams like that where you're just like, the Bears were one, where they had a guy that they were calling the starter, but you kind of knew like he wasn't really a long-term solution. And I think over this year, in fantasy included, right, that usually kind of throws people off of like, they could be a good fantasy back, but in the actual game, they're kind of so. Like, I think Austin Eckler is one of those perfect examples where, like, is Austin Eckler really that good? I don't know. Like, he's fine. He's pretty decent, but I think people give him way more credit for how good he is simply just because he puts up big fantasy numbers, right? And those two don't always correlate. So interestingly enough, I looked up Rachaad White last night. So he went it. So again, interestingly enough, my dad went to Mount Sac and played junior college ball at Mount Sac. But then I know Rachaad White went to Arizona State after that. So
yeah, that was during their Herm Edwards, era of Arizona State, which is also nuts because I think that year, that he played, he had Jaden Daniels for quarterback at Arizona State before he ended up transferring.
Wow,
to LSU.
I forgot about that.
I remember when he transferred, they were cleaning out his locker, like all his teammates pretty much dogging him for leaving, and then he wins the Heisman with LSU. So we'll see where he'll inevitably end up with some team that, I think, not to slam the guy, but just takes him way too high in the draft, that someone like the Giants or the Commanders, that you just sit back and it's like, dude, he can't solve all the problems. He may be good, but he'll be like RG3. It's like, you can't expect this guy to just come in and make everything better. But
yeah, you remember that picture I sent you with my dad and my uncles? That was them at Mount Sac.
Oh man. Well, that makes that picture even better.
Yeah.
And that episode, you'll see that picture during Father's Day. So the Father's Day episode, it's coming. Me and Maul, we've talked about it. I asked him a long time ago for it and never talked about it again, but now that he brings it up, I'll just let him know it's coming for Father's Day. It'll be a good episode. So now we'll go past.
Good thing I got that one, because this one's going to be rough. All right, go for it.
Southern Cal College.
Shocker.
Played for the Saints, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Vikings, and the Dolphins. Now, this is sort of key. He came out in 1985.
All right, Saints. Say those one more time for me again.
Yep.
Saints.
USC came out in 1995 in the third round. Went to the Saints, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Vikings, and the Dolphins. His last official playing day was 1996. But this is your bigger hint unless you know it right off the bat.
I don't know
His
it right off the bat.
His last coaching day, he was fired this year. He's been a head coach at a couple teams.
Fired this day.
Yep, he was fired earlier this year. He's been a head coach at 2 different teams. He was not a head coach this year. I can tell you his position in college, which will direct you in the head coaching position.
Did he coach the Jaguars?
He did.
Jack Del Rio.
It is Jack Del Rio.
Yes!
I thought this would be a good one. Yeah.
Yes!
I didn't know he went to USC until me and my dad, we were at the house over Christmas, and he pulled out this box of old football cards, and we were just, it's sort of sad. Like, I don't mean in terms of there's so many guys that you go through, and you're like, this dude had a football card that made him no idea that who
no stats.
Yeah, I don't, he looks awesome on this card, but I have no idea who he is. Then we came across Jack Del Rio, and I was like, where did he go to school? And,
I wouldn't have got it if you didn't tell me ahead of time, like a week ago, like you better study, because I did. I went back and I was just looking at like all these different, all the different people who've been drafted from USC, because I knew you were going to pick somebody from Southern Cal. So same deal. Like as I'm scrolling through, I see it. I'm like, oh, Jack Del Rio went to USC. Like I didn't know that, so I just happened to study. So there's a couple different ones though that like we've produced some guys that big names in football, but not because of the way they played at USC or in the pros.
Yeah, I mean he had the head coaching gig with Jacksonville from 03 to 11. Got fired from that. Was the defensive coordinator, and this is like from the head coach. He did some, coaching with the Saints, then the Ravens, Panthers, head coach of Jaguars, defensive coordinator with the Broncos. Then he was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders until 2017, which was just like, that was a hot mess.
Yeah.
And then he's been with the Washington football team, and their defense has been awful for 3 years.
So all those teams you listed, he played for those teams?
The teams I just listed was the ones that he coached for.
The ones you gave me in the clue?
Those are the ones he actually played for. He played for the Saints, Chiefs, Cowboys, Vikings, and Dolphins. And then he went back to the Saints to be a coach and sort of made his way through, which, I mean, you've talked about a lot, which we're definitely get into in the offseason of how it's just sort of this carousel of coaches that get put back into different positions that you're like, I don't know how good this dude is. He didn't do great the first time, but we're going to give him another chance.
Yeah, you wonder why teams do it. They see a coach who has talent and the opportunity. They end up being bad, so that he gets fired, and another team will then go and, he was terrible there, but he'll change it around for us. Like that. I don't think that's
his mistakes.
Yeah, like that's never worked. Like. It's one thing if you hire a good coach, or you think he's a good coach and then somehow he just doesn't work out for you. But like when he's been a proven bad coach, the possibility that all of a sudden he's going to come to your team and turn it around and be a great coach, like I don't get why teams do it over and over and over again.
We'll save it until the end. We'll go through the playoff games first this episode. But here at the end, we'll definitely talk about the possibilities of where Belichick goes. If you think Harbaugh goes to the Chargers, just sort of, general feel. The big one that I've heard recently, we've been talking on the chat, is Belichick to the Cowboys. And I think both of us are going to explain why that's the dumbest thing I've heard ever.
No, never going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Never going to happen. But, a guy that did get his first coaching opportunity that looked, I can't sit back and say anything bad. Like, it's DeMeco Ryans.
Looks great. He's got the team buy-in. They're performing on a high level. I'll tell you what, the Ravens better watch out. Like this has like classic Lamar in the playoffs written all over it. I mean, like they're going to show up thinking they're the number 1 seed playing the Texans, and like just watch out, especially the way it's gone. I think there's been one game so far in the playoffs that went like as expected, and that was Bills Steelers.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and spoil it. I'm picking the Texans. Like
I don't blame you.
Lamar is 1-4 in playoff games. He lost his first two. He actually lost the year, coincidentally enough, that he was MVP. It was to the Titans. Titans came into Baltimore. No one really thought they were going to be that. That was that famous Derrick Henry shoving Earl Thomas with a stiff arm in the back, and then he also threw a jump TD pass. Like the Ravens, it's sort of the same scenario. They rested some guys. This time they get a whole nother week off. So really, Lamar and those guys haven't played in 2 weeks. Now they're going to go against the Texans team, which I don't think is playing any hotter.
Yeah, they're
in
on
Baltimore.
fire.
And the Texans don't have anything to lose. Like they're going to come in. They're exceeding expectations. They're a dangerous team. I wouldn't want to play them, especially the way CJ Stroud's playing. He was throwing ropes.
They're playing like classic rookie, where it's like he doesn't even know how big the stage is, but he's just playing out of his mind. And like you said, they better watch out. Like I don't know if I'm going to pick the Texans, but still, I'm weighing the options for sure.
Well, looking back at the Browns game, I did want to bring this up. So the Texans received all this for Deshaun Watson, of which they ended up putting him out of the playoffs. They got Will Anderson, Tank Dell, John Mechie, Damian Harris, Damian Pierce, Keelan Green, a 2024 first rounder, a 2024 third rounder. Then they got Xavier Hutchinson, Thomas Booker, and Brandon Hill. And you list all those guys, and also by them trading away Watson, it opened the door for them to take Stroud. They probably wouldn't have looked his way if they hadn't gotten rid of him. I just sort of sit back, and then you watch the game of them just dismantle the Browns. It's yet again, I go back to this point that you kept making throughout the year, that when a team reaches on a quarterback and pays him, especially when they pay him what Watson got, $230 million fully guaranteed, you just sort of sit back and you go, it didn't work out. Like
it usually doesn't. It usually doesn't. The probabilities are stacked against you.
It was sort of sad watching Flacco. Like he was having this magical run, and everyone's like, can you imagine if Flacco gets the Browns their first Super Bowl? Like, how's everyone going to act? And then he throws 2 pick sixes, and it's like, well, he's done.
We'll never know.
It was surprising to me how bad the Browns defense looked. I didn't expect that. I mean, I picked the Browns.
Myles Garrett was essentially non-existent. He was a non-factor, and the DBs just got exposed. Jumping ahead, it was very similar to, I feel like, how the Cowboys game went.
Yeah, I was about to say the only team that got burnt worse was the Cowboys.
Well, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Like they have this elite pass rusher or pass rush, not just one guy. One guy gets all the credit, but like from a front four standpoint, they have an elite pass rush that all year has been able to get home, right? So the DBs could have been subpar this whole year. We just didn't really see it. Now, Cowboys, you can make an excuse for Bland and all that stuff but again, a lot of that stems from the pass rush, right? If the quarterback is constantly under pressure and doesn't have time to sit back there and pick you apart, of course he's going to make bad throws, and your DBs can get away with either getting burnt or not being in the right position, and it's fine because the QB's making bad throws. But all of a sudden, playoffs, your elite pass rush is not getting there, because it happened in the Browns and the Cowboys game, and the quarterback's having a field day. Not that CJ Stroud and Jordan Love aren't good. Like they both have proven that they're on the rise, but they were just shredding them. And both of those teams were expected to lose. So, I think that's just what it was. They got too comfortable with having a pass rush that was always getting home. And then the second that didn't happen, they weren't even in the game.
You could say the exact same thing. I know both of us were high on this team at the beginning of the year, especially from the defensive line. The Eagles didn't show up all year. And it led to, they had pretty much the same secondary, but they got torched. They got torched again last night. We'll get into that game here in a second. But 100%. I watched a little bit of the game, from a neighbor's house, and every time, like you said, the Texans had the ball. Miles Garrett was just, they either ran away from him, never really had a moment that he affected the play of the game, which was super surprising from my standpoint. I think going into next week, the big thing for the Texans is now you're going from, I don't want to say Tom Brady more in terms of mobility. Him and Flacco. It's not two guys that are going to beat you with your legs.
Yeah.
Lamar, on the other hand, it's like not only you trying to get pressure on him, you can't give him all day. You also have to have someone that can catch him, which I would argue is sort of impossible. Like you can't put a linebacker one-on-one.
You talk about to like spy Lamar.
Yeah,
yeah,
like that don't happen.
No, yeah,
he makes it's nuts. Me and Pops were talking about it. I didn't know he came into the league at 20 years old.
I didn't know that either.
Like, yeah, I mean, he makes guys look stupid, which he did in college. I still remember that game. I think it was against Syracuse that he just hurdled that dude into the end zone, and you're just like, I mean, it's one of those plays. I forget what like funny comedian did it, where he's like, you come over to the sideline and no coach is like, yeah, can you start doing that more? I couldn't even think about that. It's like, great job. Would have never told you to do that live, but you figured it out. The thing for the Texans that I sit back and I look at for next week is, can they run the football? Like, you can't put it all on Stroud. Singletary ran out of his mind. He sort of came out of nowhere. I know he played with Buffalo for a while, but I think everyone sort of went into this year going Dameon Pierce is the guy.
And it helped that they were at home in I think it's a dome.
It is a
in
dome.
Houston. Yeah, so Baltimore's going to be a little colder. They're away. It'll be a little different.
It will be interesting to see how do you think that game ends up, for a little early prediction of Baltimore Texans?
It's one of those, like, if the Houston Texans come out and play like they did against Cleveland, it's going to be a real good game. I think -9 is a big line if they play that way. Again, all things considered, weather, away, I could also see, the Ravens coming out and making it look like the Broncos Dolphins, like 70-20. So ultimately, I think the Ravens are going to get it done, just because I think they're a superior team to the Browns. Because even though the Browns had a great run, let's be honest, I think we were all a little shocked that they ended up where they were. But nobody was shocked that the Ravens are where they are. So I do think the Ravens are a far superior team. I don't know if 9 is the right number. I do think that's a pretty big line, especially the way the Texans have been playing. But if the Ravens come out rested and not slow, right? Like that big difference of like having the week off and you come out a little slow. If they come out just rested and start playing well, I think they'll get, handle business and end up winning.
The thing I go back to with the Ravens, they had so many injuries on defense this year. It's one of those ones, it didn't catch it surprisingly. Like the game that like makes me pause is when they played San Fran. Like, if that Ravens team comes out, I 100% agree. They blow out the Texans. It's not close. I think Stroud, he's done very well with the touch. I mean, he was the number 1 guy in the league for touchdown to interception ratio, and he led all of the NFL, not just rookies, led the NFL. The Ravens do a really good job. They had Purdy throw 4 picks. I think Sam Darnold, when he came in, threw a pick. They had 5 picks that game against the Niners. I just sort of sit back, and it's one of these ones where, can the Ravens not do what they've done with Lamar, like in the playoffs, where they just come out and they're just flat, not attacking? Because if you give the opening to the Texans, I just sit back and I go, you're playing with the wrong animal.
See, and that's exactly what I meant when, like, I can totally see the scenario where, because the Ravens have had, 2 weeks off, they're playing the Texans, right? It's not even a rival Browns, right? If it was the Browns, and they came out and they're like, all right, we're, it's a rivalry in it, they could be pumped up, but it's the Texans. I could totally see them coming out and just like it being like 7-3 at halftime. You know what I mean? And just like they mess around and let the Texans stay in it for too long.
Yeah, you let the Texans stay in, and they're going to have faith. Like they've had faith all year. I mean, they won the division when no one thought they were going to. They've played extraordinarily well. That will be all 4 of the divisional games, in my opinion, are going to be really good. Like,
Yeah.
There shouldn't be any games that you sit back and go, I can watch a different one. I'll pass on that one. The next game that happened that evening was the Chiefs and the Dolphins, which both you and
Snooze
Pops,
fest.
picked the Dolphins to upset. And I mean,
looking
I think
back, it seems silly, right? With the temperatures, Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs versus Tua, like it does seem silly that we picked the Dolphins. But God, what a snooze fest! I mean, just
I want to bring it to
the
something
Chiefs
that
are in
you
trouble
said.
too. I was going to say that
we're
they
gonna
better
get to
figure
that.
things out, because if they don't, I mean, they're going to get bounced.
It's to cut ahead to the Chiefs real quick to just lay this foundation for when we start talking about them and the Bills. They have never in Patrick Mahomes' career had an actual road game in the playoffs outside of, every Super Bowl is at a neutral site. But in terms of playoff games, Mahomes has never seen other than home field, which Arrowhead is an advantage. That place is
sure.
loud, cold, all these different things. Now, they still get the cold up in Buffalo, but Buffalo's fans are crazier, in my opinion, than Chiefs fans are.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Buffalo will be looking for blood after losing to them 2 years in the playoffs. And I wouldn't be shocked to see the Bills win. The only thing that gives me pause about the Bills is their secondary, but we'll come back to that. What I wanted to bring it to was something that you said in the text message when Saban retired. I sent out this thing that I was like, man, I feel like all my childhood has went away. Like Manning, Brady, Belichick, all these guys have what we grew up watching left, and you took it in a different direction that I wasn't expecting when you talked about just sort of the quality of play. And honestly, it's not more prevalent than in the playoffs. Like there's Mahomes, and that's really it. Like the level of guys, like when you think about like when we grew up watching like Manning playing Favre or Manning playing Breeze or Brady, like they're just Hall of Famers.
Steve Young, Troy Aikman, all those guys. And there's a few here and there, but like outside of Mahomes, from like a really quality quarterback play year in and year out, it's just not there anymore.
And I think the only guys that I'd put up there with Mahomes in terms of like this guy's a superstar is Burrow and Herbert. But like Tua, yet again, that was like when I finished watching the game, like don't get me wrong, I love Tua. I remember when he threw the 2nd and 26 against Georgia. I just sit back and I go, I don't think he's a guy. Like
he can be he's not the guy, but like again, he's not going to be a Hall of Famer. Like, and if you can just accept that fact, he can get things done for you. You just have to accept the fact that he is who he is. Like you can't build an offense like is going to be a Hall of Famer. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like he's proven too many times that like he can just very easily get exposed and just be a absolute, non-factor in a game.
He's a liability. Like
liability. That's a great, yeah.
I look back at like who's on their roster: Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And if you had told me that Herbert was starting that game, or Burrow was starting that game, or if you had reversed quarterbacks and put 2 on the Chiefs and Mahomes on the Dolphins win that game. Like that first touchdown strike to Tua, I was sitting back. I was like, okay, finally they figured it out. Like just throw it deep, let Tyreek run past everybody. They didn't do that for the rest of the game. They kept throwing them bubble screens and just stuff and that was like the other part. It's like, I want to lay a little blame at Tua's feet, but at the same time, McDaniel's play calling that game was atrocious.
Awful. Yeah, awful. Like his brain was frozen.
I mean, I get it, minus 23 degrees, but God, like you said, it was a snooze fest because you just kept waiting. It was like that meme, do something. Like you wanted the Dolphins to show up, and every time that they had an opportunity, they blew it.
It was almost like, those teams that are like, we're gonna establish the run, and there's a lot of times where they're just running the ball when you're like, dude, what are you doing? Do something else. Like that's what they were doing with those screens. Like if it was like they're gonna establish the run, but they were just gonna like establish like we're gonna run these bubble screens, but it just wasn't working. I mean, it was just small pass, punt, small pass, punt, and and then again, Tua wasn't even playing well, so even when they did take shots, it wasn't, it was a snooze fest.
100%.
Which KC, if you look at the final score, is like, oh, they won pretty handedly, but they didn't look good either, honestly. So, they better step it up this weekend, otherwise the Bills are going to bounce them.
Rashid Rice played really well for them. He was a difference maker, and it sort of drives you nuts with the Chiefs that I don't find that their guys really make like these incredible plays, like going up 50-50 balls. It's just somehow or another, like they just totally forget to guard this guy. Like Rashid Rice multiple times, like middle of the field, no one's within 20 yards of him, catches this wide open pass. And I mean, the Chiefs left points on the board. Travis Kelce dropped, probably I'd say at least, a 30-yard catch, if not down inside the 5, he probably would have scored. And you just sort of sit back and you look at it and you're like, is anyone actually going to play these guys and like line up? Because the only team that I know of that did spanked them, which was Brady and the Bucks back in the Super Bowl. Like they had a good defensive game plan. They locked down guys, made Mahomes look subpar for the first time in his whole career. We'll see if that gets there with Buffalo. We can just transition right to that game. I know that happened because of the delay, which I was telling Pops didn't think that they were doing it, or thought they had already done it. They're building a new stadium. They're canceling games for snow. The new stadium doesn't have a dome, which I'm just like, so we either play this in the snow or build a dome, because I feel bad for the Bills. They lose a day of rest.
Yeah.
Like they got to go play earlier than expected against Kansas City. Kansas City had an extra whole day to prep. So you're 2 days behind now. I just sit back and I look for the Bills against the Steelers. They came out 3 touchdowns, and then they just let the Steelers sort of hang around, which they can't do against Kansas City. Like, I don't know how I feel about the Bills. It's almost like sort of that inconsistency of the NFL that we talked about all year.
You could sum it up to how Josh Allen plays every single season. Like, God could be a top talent every single year. So could the Bills. But there's just 1 or 2 times where like he plays just inconsistent enough and the Bills can't get it done. So you're right. I mean, they could let the Chiefs hang around, which is always dangerous anytime Patrick Mahomes is on the field. But I don't see the Chiefs offense like really doing anything different than what the Steelers offense was able to do. I mean, maybe honestly, I would say the run game is even maybe edge to the Steelers right now because the Steelers' backs have been playing hot. Obviously, Mahomes is a heck of a lot better than Rudolph, but he doesn't have anybody to throw it to. So I could see it going very similar, Bills Chiefs as it did, Bills Steelers. So
it will be. I mean, the Steelers. My dad, he's grew up steel curtain defense. That I bought him when I went up to Pittsburgh, got him a shirt from the pro shop at the stadium, and he called me at the end of the game, and he's like, "Dude, that quarterback's gonna be selling insurance." Like by the end of this game, like Rudolph just struggled. It was such a painful game to watch. That the Steelers have some guys. They have 2 good receivers. They still made it a game there towards the end. Buffalo found a way to keep it more than a 1 score when Buffalo got sort of put into a corner where it was like, you can let them now have an opportunity. Buffalo did what Buffalo needed to do, which props to Buffalo for doing. But from the Steelers thing, the issue with the Steelers is it pays to not be mediocre in the NFL. And that's exactly what the Steelers are. Like, he's been a winning coach every single season, but when you win, you never can go
don't
get that
draft
quarterback.
Picks.
Yeah. Like, And that's what the position they're in. You just sort of sit back and look at the Steelers, and you're like, they know they don't have their guy, but it's like, what are you willing to give up to go
Yeah.
get him?
Yeah. It's the whole like, hey, we make the playoffs every year. And you're like, cool, who's your next quarterback? And you're like, shut up.
Yeah, when you're starting a third stringer in the playoffs, it's sort of like, hey man, y'all need to go do something.
Yeah.
Which I think they're going to have to in the offseason, finding their way. Bills Chiefs, though, when I take a look at it, it's this regular season, the Bills won. Now, there was a controversial play call where Kelsey ends up laterally. They called Tony offsides. You know, how does this play out? There's some revenge factor for the Chiefs. I think the biggest thing for the Chiefs, if they had one thing that they had to do, what do you think it is?
For what?
In order to win this game. I only have one thing for the Chiefs on offense.
Catch the ball.
Oh, it's that.
Stay on sides.
Don't let Tony play.
Oh, yeah.
Just keep him somewhere else. Like that every time that they have went to him to say, hey, can you make a play? Like he finds a way to cause problems. And it's mainly through not catching the football, which I know we've talked about a lot. Like you look at the combine, you see it. There's all these athletes, like they have this like incredible speed, height, all this different stuff. But the most important thing they don't have, catching the football. Yeah. Which I know we've talked about them in the past. Like I sit back and you think of like the Ed McCaffreys, like maybe not the most athletic guy in the world, but that dude would go over the middle back when it was legal to just pretty much assassinate this man. In the middle of the field, caught everything, knowing that he was going to get hit. And you sort of look at the guys now and it's like, you don't find guys that are willing and able to just catch anything like the Larry Fitzgeralds. That Larry Fitzgerald had more tackles than he had drops in his entire career.
Half the problem though is because they're so fast, they've never had to like be a good route runner. All they've been able to just rely on speed and run lazy routes. And now you kind of get into the NFL, and even though they may be faster than the guy next to him, the guy he's close enough still that causes some issues, and these guys can't catch. But if they ran a good route, that again, it's one of those like if they were good route runners, it's not going to help them catch the ball, right? Because that's ultimately the problem. They can't catch. It's just even if they're more wide open. I mean, again, Tony has proven that it doesn't matter how wide open he is, he's not going to catch the ball. So it doesn't matter what kind of route he's running. But it's like you said, it's sad that those are the guys that are playing now instead of the dudes that can run good routes and then also catch. Because I don't care how fast you are, a good route is going to trump speed, at least, by enough margin to get you open to catch the ball every single time, period, dot.
100%. And that to me is the big thing that sort of happened with Buffalo the past few weeks with Gabe Davis coming out. These guys that are coming in, that Khalil catch that he shrugged Minkah Fitzpatrick and juked all those guys to get into the end zone. That was probably the best receiving touchdown I've seen all year, in terms of yards after the catch. Phenomenal. By Gabe being hurt, it's really opened up their underneath routes. And I think that by letting these guys get some action now, it really sets the stage for Buffalo that if they can get through KC and they're yet again one game away from the Super Bowl, that's the beautiful thing, in my opinion, about it. An AFC, NFC championship game. I don't care who's in it. Like, it's one game to get to the Super Bowl. You don't know what you're going to get. You're probably going to get someone's best shot.
Yeah.
It's anyone's ball game. Like, it's a beautiful thing that any given Sunday quote, anything can happen. I personally, I'm on the side of going with the Bills against KC. I predict that's what I said at the beginning of the year, is that the Bills get through. This is their revenge. Like Kansas City, we didn't know Kansas City was going to be sort of as bad as they are this year. Everything's written on the wall for the Bills to win.
That's my take on it. Is, I mean, probably the whole entire second half of the season, and I think I said this in the chat, like it was same thing with the Eagles. Like we expect this little rut that they're in for them to like be able to shake it, or like, oh, this isn't them because it's so uncharacteristic of how they've been in the past. But it's like one of those where it's just like that's them. Like, that's just them this year. Like, it's good enough to make the playoffs and get them as far as they have. But, like, if you're expecting them to all of a sudden just, like, come out against Buffalo and be the KC of, like, the last 2 or 3 years, it's not going to happen because it's not the same team. They don't have it. They played the last few weeks exactly how they've been all year, and that's who they are. And I just don't think it's good enough to get it done against Buffalo.
Yeah, and I mean the perfect transition of talking about what you expect versus what you get. What we should have expected is what we've gotten for the past 25 years, which is the Cowboys blowing it in the playoffs, which is perfect. Dude, I see 7-0, and I'm like, wow, Packers are up in the first quarter. And I'm literally watching the phone in the van on the way to the hotel. Packers get the interception. And I'm like, here we go.
Yeah.
They score. I'm talking to my dad. I'm walking to go get food on the phone. I literally sit down, order, look up, pick six, like right in front. And I'm just like, dude, this day can't get any better. Like the Cowboys, I mean, they let Jordan Love, and Jordan Love's looked really good. Past, since I think it was week 9, he's thrown 21 touchdowns, 1 interception. And it's clear that the transition from Favre to Rodgers to him, like there's some traits that have come down, like the ability to throw off his back foot, like, and just put it right where it needs to be. There's just some throws that you sort of sit back and you go, dude, he's got it.
I watched, I wish Pops was here because I watched this like a highlight reel of the game. And it was this like huge Bears fan who's just like, I don't have anything to do in the playoffs except root against the Packers. Like that's all he's got going. And it was just, Jordan Love doing really well against the Cowboys, and the guy was just freaking out, just like, it's not fair.
I think I sent you guys the meme of that Goodwill Hunting where he's like, do you know how easy it is for me to do this? I do it all day. And it was the Packers drafting, the best quarterback in the division. And then that dude's just sitting there and it's the Bears. Like they can't get it right. I mean, this is what we talked about in the preseason, and it's true. And it really showing up in the playoffs. Like when you have like a Mike McCarthy that you bring into a team that you really don't see any transition from from Jason Garrett to him. They get rid of Kellen Moore, and it's still the same result. Like, in my opinion, I know a lot of this is going to be laid at McCarthy's feet. This is a Jerry Jones problem.
And it's been Jerry Jones' problem since Jimmy Johnson. Like it's going to be, and it will continue to be until he goes. But that's how he wants it. Like that's how he has ran this team. Like that's why he's doing it.
And he got lucky once. Like he traded Herschel Walker to the Vikings. He gets a slew of draft picks, gets Aikman, gets Emmett, gets Irvin, gets the guys, which then I think that what really happened is exactly what you just brought up. Hires the right coach, got Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson wins 2 Super Bowls, but there's tension. And he's like, I want to run things. Jimmy's clearly like, I know what I'm doing. I need you to get out of my chili. You're a billionaire, not a coach. Wouldn't get out of his chili, lets him go. They end up winning one more with Barry Switzer. But then after that, it's 25 years of, really Jerry Jones making dumb picks.
I was going to say, because let's be honest, like they've had the teams easily, like talent-wise, to have won a Super Bowl for sure. Like that's undeniable. But they're not able to get it done, and there's one common denominator in all of that, and it's Jerry Jones.
Yeah, I guess we can go immediately talk about this just because of how dumb it is. This idea that Belichick's going to go there is it's never going to happen.
Unless Jerry Jones finally in his old age realizes, like, I don't have the effort or energy to do what he's been doing the last 25 years, and just goes, all right, maybe if he brings in a guy like Bill who he can actually trust and just goes, all right, you do it, that would be the only way it happens. But again, that would have to be like written in stone, and Belichick get $100 million if Jerry Jones goes back on his word. Because otherwise, Bill's not going to take the job. Because you think Bill's just going to be a mouth breathing pawn on the sideline like the last two coaches? It's not going to happen.
And that to me is, it's not just Jerry Jones saying, "Hey, I'm too old for this." It's Jerry Jones saying, "My opinion should not come into this room."
Yeah. Him realizing maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I remember we talked about it a little bit. It's the great thing is YouTube's forever. Like there's this clip of Jerry sitting at the draft table and he calls this dude's coach. Like they're sitting there at the draft and they're like, "What type of guy is he? He was a good, 100% at practice. What type of student? Great student." And it's just like, this is draft day. Like these are conversations we had months ago, Jerry, but he's sitting there like, I really think we need to get this guy. And that to me is where I don't see Belichick ever sitting in Belichick sat there with his dog in draft day. Like they knew where they were going. No one else Belichick didn't have anyone around him. Like this idea that the Jones family is going to tell Belichick, like, I really don't think that we should take that guy.
Yeah.
Like Belichick ain't playing that game, and I don't see the Joneses ever changing.
Nope.
So I think McCarthy stays the head coach. I know that they want to fire him, but the issue is finding someone to come in and bow down.
He looked like he was ready to fire him mid-game. I think it was after like the second pick six. You could tell he was looking around like, whose number can I call? He was ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, which Dallas had a good team. That was sort of the crazy part is I know we were sort of talking before me, you, and Pops about possible Super Bowl predictions, and the Cowboys came up. I'd be a liar if I didn't say in the chat, I said Ravens 49ers, but then you sit back and you look at the Cowboys and you go, dude, if they had to play the Niners again, I'd sit back and say I'd probably give the edge to the Cowboys. Like they're going to be mad.
As much as it pains me, but as much as I'm happy to be wrong this time, I said Bills Cowboys. I said it. I thought the Cowboys had it this time. I mean, I thought they finally figured it out. They had the talent and they were clicking on all cylinders. And that was what did it for me in the Packers Cowboys game. You kind of this whole time we're thinking like, all right, they're going to get it together because they have the firepower to do it. And it was like, I think they can still figure it out. But when it came like very apparent that all of a sudden CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott were just like not having it that day with each other, because I don't know what was going on, but you could tell they were at each other's throat the whole day. That was when you knew, like, all right, they're not doing it because these two need to be clicking like legitimately. And CD still had a good stat line, but you could just tell from like they weren't going to get it together that day, and the Packers had their number.
Yeah, they were on two different planets that whole game. Surprisingly, Michael Gallup, really had probably his best game of the year. But outside of that, I mean, the only thing I sit back with Green Bay, they are going to go into San Francisco, which is a monumental task.
It would have been more monumental if Rodgers was still the quarterback, but he's gone. So that demon is left. But
it's funny because it's sort of the exact same demon the Cowboys dealt with. Like the worst team the Cowboys really didn't want to play was the Packers because of history, and the team the Packers don't want to play is the Niners because of the history. It's like the Niners have consistently had the Packers number for the past few years. I just sit back with it and I look at the Packers. The end of that game versus Dallas, I was like, yo, guys, can y'all knock this off? Like they were real close.
Put it away. Put it away.
I couldn't believe it when I get it. They were up 21, but they pulled their starters, ran 3 joke plays, punted it. Dallas took it right down the field and scored. And I was like, uh-oh, like here we go.
Put them starters back in.
And they did. But then it was sort of like, you could tell the whole mood of the team had changed, like where they were just like, we're coasting. And then it like Dallas started driving again and everyone was like, yo, dog, this is about to be a game again. We can't let this happen. And they luckily held on. I just sort of sit back with San Francisco, like it's going to be a different animal going into the Bay.
They're not going to get up like they did on Dallas. It would take a miracle to be able to do that against those two teams back to back. I just don't see it happening. I just don't see them. San Fran's too good too
You
good.
got San Fran in the Green Bay game?
Oh yeah. I mean, I said it at the beginning of the year. I thought the Eagles were the best looking team, but I said on any given year, San Fran has been the best team we've seen in a long time. When it comes down to paper, it was a funny coincidence that I thought they were the number 2 team this year because of how good I thought the Eagles were. So I don't see the Packers really even having a shot.
I'm in the same boat. The only way the Packers, to me, change the outcome of the game is they have to hit Purdy early and often. Like,
yeah,
the teams that have succeeded against the Niners have found pressure on Purdy throughout the game and really just sort of got them off. And I think it's not just hitting Purdy. The other big piece, it's not Purdy in that offense. It's Christian McCaffrey.
See, and that's what I was going to say. So if you look at the game against Green Bay and Dallas, like Dallas had to like exclusively go to the pass. They're a pass first team anyway, but Green Bay was ready for that. Like the Niners, even though Purdy has had amazing numbers, like everything runs through CMC. And even when Dallas did run, because they ran a little bit, they were running the ball fine. It was just they had to pass so much because of the score. Like, I think Christian McCaffrey's going to have a field day because they're going to just be opening up holes left and right.
To me, I know that it's probably going to go to Lamar. McCaffrey's the NFL MVP.
Should be, for sure. For sure.
You look at him not being on that team, like, I think San Francisco's still a playoff team. I think it would have been a lot closer with the Rams in terms of the division, but McCaffrey sort of makes that team what it is. Like, they have Debo, they have Kittle, they have Purdy, Trent Williams on the line. They have some good defensive guys, but McCaffrey is that, gadget dude.
Well, to me, it makes sense that it's become a quarterback position, right? Because he touches the ball every single play. Like, he is typically the most important person to your offense. Therefore, he usually has the most offensive production for that team. However, when a position player has quarterback level production as far as like how much they're scoring and touching the ball and that kind of, like, that's the given right there. Like, has Lamar had an MVP season? Absolutely. Like, you can't take that away from him. But when you have a position player who, because that is so rare, do essentially that same type of level of production, it's got to go to that guy because it's harder to do that as a position player than it is a quarterback. You know what I mean? Like, It's more impressive and more significant when it's a position player, especially in an age where, like, it's throw the ball, right? Like, quarterbacks are throwing the ball 50 times a game, and running backs aren't even getting paid nowadays. And now you have a running back who's doing that. Like, give him the award. Like, how many things are stacked against him, and he's still doing what he's doing? It's got to be him for the MVP. If you made me put money on it, no chance. They're gonna give it to a quarterback, probably Lamar, but in my opinion, it needs to be CMC.
Yeah, that would be, if I was a voter, that's how I'm voting this year, is for CMC to be MVP. The second game, Sunday, we're sitting there watching sort of history. I mean, it was the first time that you ever got to send a text message to anyone saying the Lions won a playoff game. Like, text messages didn't exist, which, it's funny. Do you now know the team with the longest playoff win drought since the Lions won?
Cowboys?
Nope. I sent it to a good buddy of ours. It was another team that did lose in the playoffs. Historic franchise. They just, they've won
Raiders?
Super Bowls. No, they've won. They were in this year's playoffs, lost. We've already talked about them.
In this year's playoffs.
They've won multiple Super Bowls.
You said it's the longest playoff win drought?
Yep.
Dolphins?
It is. Like, they're now behind the Browns and the Lions in terms of their last playoff win, which is crazy. For the Lions, Jared Goff looked good. That dude was slinging it.
They've been this way. They're a great team. They could win it all. They really could. But then they have those games where like Dan Campbell coaches these games, and they get blown out by the Ravens. Like they're still just too inconsistent. But I mean, talent wise, and like when they need to show up, sometimes I mean they look really good. They're really well balanced team.
They have, I mean, it's that grit, that dog, whatever you want to call it. They have that like it factor in terms of just sort of that. I love it from a football perspective. Like, I don't think that anyone wants to play the Lions. Like, the Lions are their biggest test to me was this game, was just beating Matt Stafford.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think that was the hardest test that they'll get in the playoffs, just from that mental standpoint, first playoff win. And now that they get another game at home, like, dude, that Ford Field will be a show. Like, I wish that I could afford tickets to go to that game, because I would, just to watch. That would probably be the closest that you're going to get to a college atmosphere inside of that stadium Sunday.
I think they're lucky that the Bucks beat the Eagles. I don't know how it would have played out if the Eagles would have won. Who would have played who? Would it have still
been the Eagles would have played the Lions still, no matter what.
Okay, so the Lions are lucky, I think, that the Eagles beat them, because the Bucks are, I mean, they caught the Eagles on a bad day, even though the Eagles have looked pretty bad lately. But like, I could see the Lions, because again of how kind of inconsistent they are. I could see them. They were so hyped for the Rams because it was Matthew Stafford. I could see them having like a terrible hangover game and just dropping the ball. And I could have seen, if the Eagles were playing, the Eagles are good enough to have taken advantage of that. I don't see the Bucks necessarily taking advantage of that, because the Bucks are the Bucks. They're not that good of a team. They looked great against the Eagles, but I think it's just because the Eagles looked so bad. So I do think the Lions will beat the Bucks, but I think it's going to be closer than what maybe Vegas is giving it, or what anybody's expecting. Because I don't think the Lions come out and play as well against the Bucks as they did against the Rams, because of the meaning behind that Rams game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that gives me pause with the Bucks game is I just sit back and the passing offense of the Bucks, I think, is going to be better. It's tough to say better than the Rams, but they have weapons like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. I know that tight end had butter on his hands, but he was getting open a lot. Rashad White. To me, it's where the Lions get in trouble is if they get down early. Like, if the Lions can come out just like they did against the Rams, it was the best thing for the Lions to go right down the field and score. And it's like, we got a lead, we're going to play from either the lead or a tied position, then they have a good chance. That's the big thing for the Bucks, is because, let's be honest, the Rams torched them. And it's not the first team that's gotten torched. Nick Mullins was throwing bombs for the Vikings.
But the Rams are good, right? I mean, the Rams were the team for me, like, going into the playoffs, that I was like, if I'm a team, I don't want to play the Rams. Like, because they were on the same thing on the Texans, right? Like, they're on that path, and they got Stafford. Like, the Rams were doing really well. They were a scary team. So, I don't think the Bucks have that type of explosive passing game in their repertoire. So I give the edge to the Lions still.
I think the other thing that gives the edge to the Lions, I'm going with the Lions in the game, is how the Bucks attacked Philly. I think for sure you could tell Philly was caught off guard. Now, I'll get into the Philly fiasco of how terrible of a coaching job that was. I saw it multiple times that on fourth and short distance, they threw it 30 yards down the field.
Yeah.
Like, all out blitz, and you're still having guys run 4 go routes. Like, I just sort of sit back and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, it's mano-a-mano. Like, these short slants, things that corners really struggle with, you never force them to have a change of direction. I sit back and the Lions got to watch that film. So Lions are going to be at least somewhat prepared to have, some openings. The Eagles, I mean, it's one of these ones I do agree with you that the Bucks look so good because the Eagles are so bad. Like,
I mean, they just had a lot stacked against them, right? Like Jalen Hurts had dislocated fingers. AJ Brown wasn't playing. Um, they've been on a struggle. Like it was just like so many things that worked. They kind of they lost the division, if you will, right there at the end. Like there was just a lot of things that kind of happened right there where like the Bucks didn't get the best Eagles by any stretch of the imagination because I don't think the Bucks even really looked that good. Like they did what they needed to do, and the score was kind of blown out. But like if you really watch that game, were you sitting there going like, "Man, the Bucks look good"? No, you were just like, "God, the Eagles look terrible," and that's what it was. That's what it was. And so that's why in my mind, like unless the Lions just come out and absolutely lay an egg, which I don't see happening. That's why I'm saying I think the Lions got lucky that the Bucks won because the Bucks are going to show up and play exactly like they did, which was fine, which is why they're in the playoffs, but they're not that good of a team, and the Lions are gonna they're not gonna look as bad as the Eagles did, and they're gonna win.
yeah, the Eagles, in my opinion, you have no other choice but to fire Sirianni. Like here's a guy that he was an offensive coordinator for the Colts, and I really started looking back at that time that he was with the Colts. There's nothing there that I sit back and I go, "Oh, the Colts were playing amazing." Like this wasn't from the Andrew Luck days. This is from the Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz days and Matt Ryan days. Like it's just sort of like, at no point was that offense clicking, and they had a really good year last year, but the offensive coordinator that was doing it is now with Indy, and Indy looked good for playing with a backup quarterback all year. Like at no point did I see Sirianni like being like, "Hey, we have a problem. Here's what we're going to do to fix it." Like,
I think that's a little premature in my opinion. Just from like they went to the Super Bowl last year.
they fired
So
Doug Peterson the following year.
I know. I'm not saying that they won't. Like, I mean, there's a reason that the Eagles, aren't like a super amazing, franchise. But to go to the Super Bowl and then start the season 11-1 and go, make it the playoffs again. I get it. The end of the season, recency bias really leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But I do think they give him at least one more year. And from there, that's where it's like, all right, same thing with like Mike McCarthy. I think they give him another year, but it's one of those like, we're expecting Super Bowls with this level of talent and team, and if you can't, then now we got to move on. But to go to the Super Bowl, go 11-1, and then make the playoffs, I think it's premature to just get rid of him right away just because of the season ended poorly. I get it. Like if you were an Eagles fan, you're probably just like so fed up because of how good it started. But I think you do got to give him at least one more year with this squad.
For me, it's just he hires Matt Patricia, did not change anything. They got worse.
I could see him going for sure.
Oh, I think
because I think he's one of those, just like Josh McDaniels. Like what outside of the Patriots, which again you could attribute a lot to Tom Brady and Belichick. Like what has Matt Patricia done? I think he's proven to everybody now that he is not actually that good of a coach. He was riding coattails, and he's being exposed now because
for sure.
Yeah, he needs to go. I'll give you that.
Yeah, for me, it's that you either have to fire Sirianni and the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, or Sirianni comes out today and says, "Hey, offensive and defensive coordinator have been fired." Like, we got to have wholesale changes because for the amount of talent they had on the offense, you look at their offensive line. They're not going to have Jason Kelsey announce that he retired today or told the team last night. You could tell on the sideline. I mean, he was teared up.
Yeah.
You knew it was his last game. I just sort of sit back and look at that team. They lose some guys. I think they lose a lot of their deep age, like Graham, Julio, some of these guys that, not saying that they couldn't have done anything this year, but it was one of those ones where it's like you're sort of reaching. They're well past their prime.
Yeah, speaking of Julio, when he took that hit on the sideline, I was just like, that was one of those things like, did he die? Like, is he that old? Like, is like because he's past his prime and he hadn't been hit that hard in a long time, and all of a sudden he got hit and he's down. It's like he's got to hang it up because
Yeah. What's surprising is that you mentioned Julio's is just big body guy, and then Devontae Smith was playing lights out last night, and the dude looks like a toothpick. Like,
oh yeah, he's
the
always
fact,
been that way though.
yeah. I mean, I still remember the year he won the Heisman. It's just if you can get it up to him, he's probably going to catch it. Like, really good with contested catches for being really as small as he is. Makes some great catches. The question that I think it's sort of this circular thing, and the reason I said I think that he gets fired is Philly went through this exact same thing. It was like you have a quarterback who played really good, not playing so good. They ended up winning that Super Bowl with Nick Foles. Then you get Carson Wentz again. He doesn't look good. The whole thing doesn't look good. They draft Jalen. They sort of think Jalen's their guy. They fired Peterson. Never really comes out. Was he in support of Wentz? Was he in support of Hurt? Like where that went. Then they get Sirianni, have a really good year with Jalen. They get to the Super Bowl, lose the Super Bowl, bad year with Jalen. I think people are like, where do we want to go? Because they've already paid Jalen. Like, you're not going to get out of that. I don't think that they move on from Jalen at all. I know that people are going to say that.
I was gonna say this sounds like Jalen's college career though too.
Oh, 100%. Which to me, this is why I told this to Pops. I don't think we talked about this in the text. To me, if you fire Sirianni, the perfect coach is Belichick. And the reason for that is Hurts played under Saban. Hurts can take, a Saban type coach, which Belichick is, and strive under that. And because that's what Brady was. I mean, I'm sure Belichick just chewed him out in front of briefings, knowing that he could because Brady could take it.
He wasn't going to fold, yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of the guys that played under Saban's, or I think it was Bryce Young. Bryce Young said that Saban told him one time that he was sorry for yelling at him. He wasn't really yelling at him. He was yelling to him, but it was the other guys in the room that he was like, if I had talked to them like that, they would have just folded. They would have never, they couldn't respond to that. But you could take it, and by me yelling at you, it got these other guys in the room to be like, I got to shape up. Yeah. That's what Brady was to Belichick. That's what I see in Belichick. Like, he's going to have to find that guy. That's why I like the Eagles. I think the Eagles have a lot of pieces. Do they give them power? I don't know. But I don't see Belichick going to a team that it's a major rebuild. Like, no. Dallas is in play just because of the players Dallas has. Philly has players. Like, they're just a few pieces away from us going back to the Super Bowl. It's not this. He's not going to go to the Washington Commanders, in my opinion, because it's like, dude, they're 3 to 5 years from being in a good position. So, I mean, that sort of wraps up the playoff games. Talking about coaches, Belichick, do you have any? I know he just interviewed with Atlanta. Do you think that's a good fit for him?
I was going to say, I thought I heard something about Atlanta. I don't know. I mean, I think they have pieces there. I still think they're kind of rebuilding. It would depend on what Belichick thinks he could do front office wise as far as picks. Like, Belichick's been kind of notorious for like not going after draft picks. He usually likes to take people who are already well established and build around that. So I think that's probably what a lot of the interview dealt with, of just like, what do we think we can do to make this team good, like right now? Like, it's probably not go get Caleb Williams. It's probably trade for somebody who is better than Desmond Ridder, which is apparently anybody at this point. But I don't know. I think there's still too many question marks with Atlanta for Belichick to want to step into that.
I agree. We talked about it in the text last night. For me, the hardest position to get right in football is the quarterback. And so it's a lot easier to go to a team that it's like, hey, we got that one figured out. Like there's no really questions about it, which is what Harbaugh's doing with interviewing with the Chargers. But you said something that I had not heard before. And maybe it was just I was under a rock or something. That San Francisco players thought that Harbaugh was too mean.
Yeah, they didn't like. I mean, like they were doing well against him, underneath Harbaugh. Like they did well. He turned the team around, but the players didn't like him. Like they like yelled at him too much, and they weren't like enjoying the game anymore.
Yeah. Which that to me, if you had not told me the name and you're like, who is that? I've been like, oh, that was Belichick. Like, I didn't. Maybe it's just I didn't see that coming out of Harbaugh. That's what I sit back with Belichick. I think that's the big question mark with him is whatever team he goes to. Like, people put up with the Patriot way because Brady was there. Like in Brady,
they won,
and they won. Yeah. Like the only team when I sit back and think about the Falcons in terms of who's out there outside of draft picks, I know they're sitting at number 8. They could probably maybe get a Jaden Daniels. Hopefully it's not J.J. McCarthy, even though he declared. I don't know why he did. Like, he peaked at Michigan. I may be proven wrong here in a few years, but I'd probably bet my bottom dollar on that one.
Nah.
So I think the only guy that the Falcons could go get is Russell Wilson. Like, it's just, he's better than Desmond Ridder, but it's still one of those guys that his big thing is the salary. I sit back and look at sort of these teams outside of the playoffs, and it's just like, they're in some messes. Like,
I mean, I could see the Falcons trading up to get somebody. I don't know who it would be, but they're probably not going to trade up to try to go to number 1 because I just don't know what they could really offer in that point or what the Bears would be willing to take from the Falcons for that. But I could see them trading up to like number 2 or 3, or maybe even like taking a gamble and just going up like a few spots to like 5 or 6, hoping someone like, I don't think Drake May is the guy, but I could see, if they were willing to get Desmond Ridder, they could probably be willing to take Drake May. You know what I mean? So I could see him doing something like that, but
I'm going to say this now, and yet again, I may be wrong. Drake May to me is another Sam Howell and another Mitch Trubisky. Came out of UNC.
Same person.
Yeah, it's the exact same guy. Like, I get that, and this is what drives me nuts about Mel Kiper is at a combine, you're going to have these perfect, no pass rush, get your feet set, throw it to this guy who's doing his best job to catch the football because his job's on the line too. He's trying to get drafted. It's like this perfect scenario to sort of showcase your skills, which I think each of these guys have. But when it becomes an actual game and it's like, I got to have you win, that's just not the guy that he lost to Virginia. Like, and I get that quarterbacks may not always have the best college careers and then show up in the pros. But at no point am I like sitting back going, that's the guy that I'm going to do that with a 2nd overall pick. Like those guys happen later in the draft. Your Brady's, your Favre's, these guys that sort of have like a mixed bag of a career. There's some possibilities there. That's what Drake May is to me. Like, just sort of that guy that maybe, goes to a better team like the Steelers or something. Maybe he works his way into the rotation and shows something. But he's not Caleb Williams in my mind. Like, Caleb Williams is the star in the draft. And outside of him at the position of quarterback, I sit back and I go, I don't see anybody that I'm taking a 1st-round pick with. So, I mean, I know that you're.
What about like the Titans? Like, they go from Vrabel to Belichick, right? Like, I to be honest, I think a lot of Titans fans were pretty shocked that they like. I think a lot of them liked Vrabel.
The thing with Vrabel, I keep going back to this because I know we've equally taken our dumps on Vrabel. I put so much of it on the GM. Like, and the thing that really sort of made me think about that again was they have draft clip, inside the draft room when they traded AJ Brown, and you could tell he was just like, what are we doing? Like,
wouldn't that make sense though? Like, if the GM is thinking like, I've got Vrabel, and he's had Vrabel for a long time because he played under Belichick, and he's like this Belichick-esque type person. And he gets rid of Vrabel thinking like, I can go get Bill now. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's thought.
I can see it happening. The biggest thing with the Titans is, dude, that's the worst team in football next year.
They're screwed. Henry's going to be gone. Will Levis is going to be their quarterback. They don't have hardly any offensive weapons. Their defense is probably the best thing about them, but it's still kind of suspect. Like,
but that was because of Vrabel. Like, if they don't go get a Belichick that's a good coach, like I think they played as well as they did because of Vrabel with a defensive mind. But in terms of just like who they are as a team, like you look at that roster and there's like who's starting on a different outside of Derrick Henry, which he's gone. Like outside of that, like I'm not taking any of their wide receivers.
nope.
I'm not taking their tight end or maybe an offensive lineman to play guard or something. But outside of that, like they got Jeffrey Simmons on defense, and that's about it. Like it's just not a good football team. And that to me is like where Belichick's different. Now Harbaugh in the other instance, do you think he goes to the Chargers? Do you think he stays at Michigan?
I legit thought he was going to stay at Michigan, but just everything that's going on, there's too many signs pointing to he's probably leaving.
Yeah, I mean when you go and you interview for a job, that to me is sort of the like, I don't know if he wanted to stay at Michigan, he would have signed the contract. You know,
if you'd have made me pick, I would have said like if they win the championship, he probably stays. But if they lose, he's probably gone. But even though they won and he's still doing all this, like I would have thought that he was looking to like, all right, we got one under our belt. Now our dynasty begins. Let's do this. Like that's what I was thinking. And it just right now it just seems like he's kind of using that as like his stepping stone to get back into the NFL, which I could be wrong, but I would have said that he stayed. So I don't know.
I think the Chargers are at least smart enough that they sit back and they go, we need help. Like they have too much talent on that.
The Chargers want him for sure. That's not the issue. I think it's whether Harbaugh decides to actually leave or not.
Yeah, I mean, I sit back and I look at that team. The quarterback's answered. You got Herbert. Like, I think that they have some guys on defense that are question marks, mainly Boza, and it's just because of how much he's been injured. Like, he's never been that guy that, like, week in, week out, it's like, hey, he's on the field all the time making tackles. Like, Khalil Mack outplayed him this year because he was on the field more. Like, it's hard to sit back and go, yeah, this is your guy and pay him all that money. And that's sort of the thing that I think they need a Harbaugh to come in to sort of just say, hey, if I'm going to come in, I'm going to make a lot of decisions and the GM's going to have to be cool with it. You need to let me he built a roster in San Fran. Like San Fran was not a good football team when he took over, got him to a Super Bowl. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I mean, we got good playoff games outside of that, divisional round. What is your preferred AFC and NFC championship game? If you not thinking of who's going to be there, but if you could name the matchup to happen, what would you put forward?
At AFC, I think it's Ravens Bills. I think both who I want to see and who I do think goes, just because they're the best teams. I think like they're going to be the ones that put up against the best games. NFC, obviously, the Niners are just they're just too good. I would like to see the Lions get there as well. Just as like a last hope. Or like I don't know, building block for them of being like what could be and going forward. But so that's what I'll say. Bills, Ravens, and Niners, Lions.
I love to see the Texans Bills in the AFC. That way, whoever goes, neither Texans have never been to a Super Bowl, the Bills have never won. To see them, and on the opposite side, I'd already said this in the text message, to have an NFC North showdown of Packers Lions in the NFC Championship in Detroit, like that would be like I'm sitting back and I'm like, dude, you could not pull me away from the TV that game because that would be an epic one to watch. Because Detroit's already lost them once on Thanksgiving. You know, there'd be a lot of good storylines. I just sort of sit back and think with that, and I'm like, dude, sign me up for that. And then, because then if the Lions were to win, knowing that whoever wins the Super Bowl is going to win it for the first time, that's what I'm about. But outside of that, you know, that sort of wraps up this episode. You got anything else before we shut it down?
Nope. Appreciate everybody watching. Tune in.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Paul Chalks. We'll see you next time.